I have surprisingly two guests from Fourfold Studio simultaneously on my show today, Brooke Williams and Harriet Mckindlay. Brooke Williams is the founder and director of Fourfold Studio, and she was previously the manager of Codesign Studio, Queensland team. She is a strong advocate of placemaking movement in Queensland. She is an experienced urban designer, event manager, and placemaking advisor who has worked on urban renewal and place-based economic regeneration strategies throughout Australia. She is passionate about creating vibrant cities with proud and connected communities. Harriet Mckindlay is a senior placemaking consultant at Fourfold Studio and has also previously worked at Codesign Studio. Harriet is a designer with a passion for human-centered placemaking and locally led approaches to solve complex urban issues. She is an urban planner specializing in human-centered placemaking with a passion for placemaking strategy informed by authentic community engagement. In this episode, we talked about Fourfold Studio and their personal insights and projects that they did and learned from. Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I am Asban Sari, the founder of the organization Peacemakers Pakistani, and I am bringing you the stories of placemakers, artists, and professionals from around the globe about how they created an impact and made change happen. You are listening to the Making It Happen show. Thank you for joining in. Enjoy the episode. Okay, hello both of you. Hello Harriet and Brooke. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's so good to see you both together. And how are you and how's it going where you are?
It's great. Thank you so much for having us. It's good actually. We've had our first sunny day in a little while. We're in Brisbane in Australia, and the floods have been quite bad here where we are. So we've had quite a lot of rain, and today we're finally having a lovely sunny day. So, yeah.
That's nice. I miss rain over here. It's pretty hot now in Lahore. Okay, so let's start with the questions. My first question for both of you is, how did you find a passion for placemaking movement and public spaces?
Should I start with this one? So, my background's in urban design, and I spent quite a lot of time, as an urban designer, designing public spaces and networks of public spaces. And as part of that role, we really look at what are the components that bring a public space to life? And so much of the industry focuses on the physical aspects of the parks and, their connections, the trees, the shade, the furniture, even the functions that happen there. And there's always this layer that we consider in urban design around the social and cultural kind of fabric of public spaces. And what we were finding, though, is that despite all our best intentions, when we actually see these places come to life, quite often that social energy that happens in a public space, it doesn't exist anywhere to the level that we would love to see. And so placemaking, the pathway to placemaking for me has always been about how do we bring people into public spaces and create that connection, that really important connection that people have with places, and build that. So it's not just about physical piece. We really do need to also consider how that space helps communities connect to each other, how it helps them to be connected to the places that they're from and their communities. So, that would probably be my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess similarly to Brooke, I came from a background of urban planning and urban design, but I was really lucky to come across Codesign Studio, who was essentially the same work that we do at Fourfold, but a few years prior. So I was really lucky because I got an internship there whilst I was studying. And that really, for me, helped shape the rest of my career because I was able to work on these really amazing projects involving local people in the processes and really creative ways using things like tactical urbanism and things. So I personally was really lucky because I came straight from uni into placemaking. So that's really kind of formed the foundations of my career as well. So a little bit different, but a little bit similar at the same time. Definitely.
Yeah, and I have read about Codesign Studio as well. So it must have been a great journey from that to here. There to
Definitely.
hear. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, Harriet and I worked together both at Codesign Studio, but I was in Brisbane at the time and Harriet in Melbourne. So now we've stolen her to Queensland.
It's a good decision.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, Brooke, tell us about the Fourfold Studio and your current focus.
Well, so I guess leading on from that last question, we both have come from Codesign Studio, but my pathway into Codesign Studio, as I said, I was with an urban design firm previously, working built environment, so economic, development, all of the kind of looking at planning and urban design and landscape architecture and how all those components come together. And so very much had a sort of a history and a focus on the built environment. And as I said, when I was in that role, it was really about exploring what that gap was, which to me was this sort of placemaking focus. But I also then was really interested in, what could we be doing? And so with some friends in the industry at the time, we got into more of a tactical sort of activations and tactical urbanism approach here in Queensland. And at that stage, I don't think I even knew what placemaking was. It was probably about that time when the term started being used. And we were really interested in that sort of ground up approach and what can we as local citizens do to actually impact our urban environment, as opposed to the other way, which I was used to, which was more of the sort of the client would come to the design team, the designers would design a space and then the community would use it. And so my pathway to Codesign Studio sort of threw me then from being this almost top-down approach into that very much grassroots, let's get communities together to build this and to do it ourselves. And so I kind of experienced both of those angles. And then naturally, I think, through my history and also because the projects that I was working on were in Queensland, and so the context of those projects tended to be quite large scale, and I was connected into that built environment industry. The work at Fourfold Studio very much looks at how we can integrate into the existing built environment processes to create social impact. And so we work a lot with councils and with government and with developers, and we generally would partner and collaborate with the designers as well. So working all the way through from a concept design in a park to how we then activate the park and bring local people into it, to how we set up sustainable place governance models that allow communities and local stakeholders to play a role in that ongoing love and care of places. So that was a long answer.
And it's also our 2-year birthday today as well.
Oh, very congratulations, and I give you all the best wishes so it goes well in the future as well.
Thank you.
Hopefully we don't die young.
There's so much to learn from people around the globe, and definitely I've learned so much from you, from Lucinda from Australia, and from Michael Store as well. And I really appreciate what you people are doing for your communities and what people are doing for themselves as well. Without their contribution and without their participation, it's not going to happen anyways. So I appreciate that a lot. Okay, so Brooke, Fourfold Studio recently collaborated on a project called Negotiator Escapes. Can you share a little bit about this project and what this approach means for how public spaces are designed and activated?
Yes. Okay. So Negotiator Escapes. This was a little bit of a research project for us, and it was before we started this sort of approach of really collaborating with the landscape architects and urban designers, or we were at the very early stages of that journey. And I mentioned before this, knowledge that there was spaces in our city centre that were, on the river, should be nice and connected, had lots of people around them, but were not being used and weren't loved at all. And so as an assessment of that, I think we really acknowledged that there was a lot of spaces in our city fabric where people were walking, the public community were accessing and using these spaces, but they weren't actually meant to be used in those ways, and because a lot of them were privately owned. And so there's these little sort of pockets all over the city centre where it's not council-owned land, and they tend to get a little bit forgotten. And so Negotiator Escapes was all about, well, how could we negotiate with our private and public sector partnerships to really, and with our community, to create spaces that are for everyone. So, those little forgotten car parks and laneways and alleyways, what could we be doing to maximise their value to the community, but also to the landowner, by coming together to come up with collaborative solutions, by co-sharing in every aspect of management, funding. So it was a really lovely little research piece that we did, and incredibly, it's one of those things that until you actually start that conversation, you don't realise how many people and how quickly people will just get behind those sorts of projects. So it was great to see all of that come to fruition.
Okay, so being a research project, you just made a report, something like that, or you just put things into action as well? What was it about, like on the scale of making it happen?
We're all about making it happen, but we go all the way from strategy to action. So we talk about creating places and the journey that you need to go through to create places, as well as then that place curation, which is then how do you bring that place to life? What's the activity that happens there? And depending on the different type of environment, sometimes it's about businesses coming together to curate their main street environment. Other times it's about a local community, activating and using their local park. And so depending on what scale it is, the role that we would play could be anywhere from, setting up community groups and enabling them to then continually to activate a space, running micro grants programs we often use that as an approach to catalyse and build momentum within different community organisations. So bringing art and culture into a space, getting schools involved, working with businesses, whatever it might be, but small amounts of money that essentially allow those people that previously had no agency to then take that money, take the permission to act and to engage with public space, and then to continue that momentum on. So we were always wanting to set up a sustainable system, a self-sustaining system. It's not necessarily about Fourfold coming and running lots of events, although we'll do that to kickstart it. And then once the system's running, we sort of step back and then it operates on its own.
All right. Thank you so much for that elaboration, because it's going to help me and others as well, definitely. And yes, adding schools and institutions to the process is definitely a good step, because we have been through it, and on a very small scale, but it was helpful, and kids are very excited to join in. They add a lot of energy to the entire movement and all the projects that we are doing. Okay, so my next question is for Harriet. It's been 2 years of Porch Placemaking. Fourfold Studio has been a key organization for delivering a project like that, for organization of it. So can you share a little bit about your experience of working on this project and lessons from it?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. So for people that don't know what Porch Placemaking is a program that we've been running for 2 years. And essentially it was created during the midst of lockdown, right at the beginning of kind of the COVID-19 lockdown. And it was in response to the fact that we were all isolating from one another. However, we wanted to make sure that we were still exploring opportunities to connect. So Porch Placemaking was really about how can we continue to connect with one another on a community level and a person-to-person level when you can't actually physically come together. So that's essentially where the idea came from. And the idea was that we encouraged people across the globe to take one small action to connect with their neighbourhoods whilst maintaining that social distance. So it might be leaving some lemons out the front of your house for your neighbours to connect, or dropping off a note to a neighbour, or we saw some amazing examples of people activating their front yards, those sorts of things that's creating and bringing placemaking to private property, and then also still allowing for that community connection. So I suppose we were really overwhelmed with the positive response. We reached out, Lucinda Hartley was also involved from Neighbourlytics, and we reached out to the global placemaking movement, and we were really overwhelmed with the response, because everyone was really keen to get involved and to also be able to contribute, because I think people were seeing globally the same challenges around social isolation and people being really lonely during that time. So people were looking for kind of the small actions that they could do. So we've now run it across 2 years, and I think our experience running it last year was really that as a global community, I think there was a sentiment that everyone was just really exhausted. Kind of globally, everyone was in a different position with the COVID-19 lockdowns. Everyone found it was quite a roller coaster going in and out of lockdowns, and I guess the emotional toll that took. So instead last year we kind of pivoted a little bit, that rather than having kind of those bigger events or bigger actions, it was really about just getting people to take one small action to connect. So yeah, it was equally successful, and we saw lots of projects. And I think personally, one of the things that really excited me was about the action, but it was also about the connection. You know, for you and I, Asba, that's how we met. And it's so amazing to be able to connect with someone globally. Like, it's not just about me connecting with my neighbor, but it's about feeling part of a global movement. And I think that was definitely feedback that we received from lots of people that participated, was that they felt part of like something so much bigger, even though it was, yeah, like I said, just that on the ground thing that they did. It was that they felt connected with like a whole movement as well. So I think that was really lovely.
Yes, definitely we connected because of the Porch Placemaking movement, and it was great to know you. And this is why we are here as well. Yeah. Okay, my struggle during Porch Placemaking was something very funny, because people over here are connected on private home, but on private homes, like on a street level more than on a society level or on a community level, on like on a city level, basically. So if I was talking about the Porch Placemaking to them, they were like, "What do you mean by that?" Because it was so obvious for them that they didn't see it as anything extraordinary or something like that. So if you might have seen the video that we created for that, it was showing gratitude towards them for being so kind towards each other. So they were like, really, do we need appreciation for that? This is how we live. Yeah. So it was
on that as well. I think the term porch as well is something that we're constantly getting feedback on, because it's not a word that necessarily resonates with everyone. Like, you know, in Australia, we call it more your veranda or your front steps or something like that, versus in America, it's more of like a stoop or something like that. So I guess the term porch is kind of contentious in that way. And like you said, a lot of people have come back to us and said, oh, but that's just a given, you know, that we sit out the front of our house and we meet people and things like that. So I think
it's so nice.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't happen enough here. We have our backyards, our front yards don't get used not as much as they could.
Yes.
So yeah. But it shows too with that, you know, little moves, like actually just having people sit in the front yard and interact with people as they're walking along the street, does so much to improve that connectivity within our communities. So it was a nice change.
Yeah, and we can all learn from one another, can't we? As well, like watching your video, it was so heartwarming, and I was like, oh my gosh, we need to be doing more of that. So I think everyone's kind of learning.
Thank you so much for appreciation, and definitely it was a heartwarming experience for ourselves as well, because while meeting those people and congratulating them or admiring their work or just admiring their effort for not isolating themselves or not holding back things that they're sharing with other people, it was a lovely experience for ourselves as well. Okay, so my next question is for both of you. That's what does inclusive spaces mean to you, like to you personally, and how do you expect it to create? How do you think that it's vital for the communities to thrive, and what does the role placemaking plays in creating inclusive spaces?
It's a lot in that question. Okay, processing. So inclusive public spaces. I don't know whether this is just because my head's been in, we've been running engagement on like a region-wide strategy for a council, but we've been talking a lot about population growth and densification and the fact that we're going to have to move from our 600 square metre lot houses into units, and what that means for people and for communities. And I think what we're realising and what COVID really has shown the world, but something quite new here in Queensland, I'd say, is that the value of those public spaces for communities, and in particular people living in the denser, more urban areas. And so if our public spaces are where we connect with our communities, and they're, that is the place where we also have our outdoor, recreation, our respite from our homes, then we need to have places that are going to be supporting everybody within the community, from the youngest children to the older generations. And so I think inclusive spaces means exactly that. Lots of flexibility, definitely accessible from a all abilities perspective, but also engaging as well for a range of different people for different purposes. So that idea of kind of digital overlays, so that you talk about all of those things from a function, we can design them like that. But then I think what placemaking brings to that is that aspect of, well, inclusive is about how do we get those people using those public spaces to actually then own and love and use them, rather than there be this great design space that's just empty all the time. So a lot of what we do is really about making sure that communities are involved from the outset, that they're with us on the journey, so that they then bring their networks into the story, that they have that attachment, that we know that it's right and it works for them, and that they also can come along and use that space and feel very welcome there. Do you want to add to that?
I would just say I 100% agree with everything Brooke said. And I think that a phrase we often use at Fourfold is that we create places that people love and feel connected to. And the process of actually creating that, I think, is where placemaking is the vehicle to achieve that. Because if you look at a park as an example, whether it's an existing park, it might be how the community is using it or activating and helping shape it. Or if you're designing a brand new park, how can the community actually participate in how that park is designed and shaped? And also, when looking at inclusion, making sure that we're looking at our diverse communities as well. How are different people using it at different times, and how can our built form really support making sure that it is an inclusive place? So I think placemaking is 100%, like I said, the vehicle for achieving the creation of inclusive places.
Did that answer the question? Hopefully.
Yes, it does answer the question. And definitely, because we are talking about inclusive spaces, we are having the discussion here as well, because the major focus right now is we are definitely excluding children from the talk, and also the youth, because youth are trying to reclaim or claim their rights in the places themselves, but we are not asking them, or maybe being a youth, I would say that I wasn't asked about my perception or my priorities by the elders. It's being designed for the elders, and elders don't use those places. So it's
and
not.
I think often, and often, people kind of take for granted the perspective of young people as well, as they might not know that kind of thing. But something that we focus on a lot with our engagement when doing community engagement is making sure that we are bringing in the youth voice into that decision making, because we've had some recent engagement, and you sit down with young people and just the ideas and the way that young people often think when you're a bit older. I feel like often you can be a bit more stuck in your ways, or at least I know, I kind of think this because of this, whereas the young people, they bring such a fresh perspective.
Even little kids, the really young kids, we've run great workshops, particularly if you're talking about a public space and something that they're going to be able to get in and engage with, and they just have the most incredible ideas. And the idea of over manufacturing play, for example, kids will always just want to get out and get messy and put sticks together and climb trees, and to be able to hear that from them, I think is really, really interesting, and they love the opportunity to be involved in any of these processes. So no, I agree 100% is, how do we hear from the youth? We try, really you want to be able to hear from everyone, and that's why we're, I guess, so lucky in what we do, because we're often on these projects that are at that stage where we can bring those voices in.
Yeah, because just recalling that when I realized that I have a voice and it matters, and it is able to create something or stir some ripple effect. That's when I just came up with the organization and just head on to the world that yes, I have something to say and I want my place, because it matters to me. Like it was quite an overwhelming realization that I didn't know I am able to do a lot of things, or I wanted to do a lot of things, because we weren't allowed to experience it in that space. Through my graduation and my study tours, I realized that there's so much to do, there's so much to experience in the city, and we were doing it only in the on the institution level, not as a city level. That we needed that independence and that kind of recreation and luxury on daily basis. It has to be a part of lifestyle, not something like to do on weekends. So it was a lovely experience for myself, and this is something I want my citizens to experience as well.
Yeah, spot on.
Okay, so my next question is for Brooke. I see you recently spoken at the Arts on Top conference. Can you share a little bit about the role placemaking plays in the arts? Do you have any examples for this approach in practice?
Arts on Top, yeah. So that was a really fun conference, and I spoke at that conference with Stephen Burton from Pomo, and we have run a project together actually. So because I actually studied graphic design before I did urban design, and I have quite a strong network of creative friends, I suppose, musicians and street artists, all the way through to kind of gallery and more fine arts. And something that's always been really apparent to me from the built environment perspective is that, we want to bring public spaces in our streets and our urban life to life with art and culture and creativity, but the two industries don't work closely together as often as they could. And so that's something that I'm hugely passionate about and would love to see happen more, is better interaction and collaboration between the two industries. And so that's what our discussion at Arts on Top was about. But through the discussion, we talked with Stephen from Pomo, and that project has been around a streetscape upgrade where they were really interested in bringing to life. There is a really small regional town, and they have a really strong history and local identity, but nobody driving through would ever know it. And so the project was about how do we tell the stories of place so that people that stop for a coffee can actually get a sense of that immediately on arrival. And so it was all through art and also through interpretation of different landscape materials, sound. So we had storytelling. You can actually plug into an app and be walking along the street and hear locals telling the stories of the place, their memories of different major events that had happened, furniture that's been designed from old bits of timber from old shop fronts. So this idea of art and place, and how art can really help us tell the stories and express that narrative of the place, has been something that we've been working with quite a lot on a few of our projects. So, but that's what that conference was about, was this sort of bringing those worlds together.
Awesome. I really love the ideas of how the projects or the experiences you're giving to people. Because I just love that idea of the local telling the stories about the community, and the experience of listening to the timber cutting and the furniture making out of it. Because this is something I can relate to our area of the wall city, because there is steel working on, there is above the wood. Like, this is something, because it stays in the memory, the sensory memories, especially what we hear, we recall it as it's the quickest memory that we can get to with the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing, oh, sorry, I was just going to say the lovely thing about that process was because we took the co-design approach, we met such incredible locals that had lived in this town for 90 years and, you know, wanted to share their stories. And so every part of it, they just felt so much ownership over the ultimate design and the outcome. And you know, you can see it'll be that sort of place where people will pull up in and they'll be driving through, and you'll get the baker who will come and, you know, come and look at this and show them around, and that really kind of lovely sense of ownership of that public space through that process. Sorry, keep going.
Great. Ownership and that kind of connection, definitely. This is something that's going to connect to people and make a relationship with them. Definitely, when we share our experiences, we form a relationship with people.
Yeah.
Okay, so my next question is for both of you. What are the benefits of tactical urbanism for you, and how do you suggest its management? How long do you expect the transformation to last as well?
Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose the thing with tactical urbanism is that a lot of the time it is temporary in nature. And I think by being temporary, it allows you to try some different approaches and test different things and then refine it before kind of committing to something long term. So I think if you look at, say, a traditional design process, tactical urbanism is an opportunity to test what that final design might be and then make iterations as well before kind of committing to that final finished product. So we worked on a project recently with a town called Grafton up in New South Wales, and we adopted a tactical urbanism approach for that project. So that's kind of a traditional, they were doing a master plan for the CBD, and there were quite a few recommendations in there around how the streetscape could be realigned and changed to kind of make, like Brooke was talking before, make people stop and spend more time, and also just create a place people really want to be. And so we used a tactical urbanism approach for that project because if someone looks at a plan on a page, they're not necessarily seeing the full story about what the impact of that design would be and what it would be like to go down and experience it. So what we did on a small scale is tested all of those recommendations from a precinct plan. So we took a small area of the street and we changed the angle of the car parking, and we extended the footpath, and we brought temporary greening in, and we brought more seating in. And it meant that people could come down and experience it for themselves and see what it would be like actually if the street was changed in that way. And what we heard then on feedback on that precinct plan was both refinements to the design, but also people just being so thankful of, like, it was amazing. You know, I was hesitant when I saw that the parking was being rearranged, but I was able to come down and park my car and actually saw that it would work really well. Or, oh, it was so nice to grab a takeaway coffee and then sit out on the green space and enjoy the street, those sorts of things. So I think that in that instance of a project, it really elevated then what will become an amazing design, because people were able to come and then provide that feedback in a really kind of personal way. So I think that's...
I think that tactical urbanism is a tool that can really help us either respond really quickly to a problem, which is that sort of resilience piece I think we've seen with COVID around the world. It's also a tool to help us test ultimate design before we invest in money, which is what, and to have those tricky conversations with community, which is the Grafton case. I think where potentially there's sometimes that little bit of I often hear conversations of like, oh, you know, it's just a cheap kind of response to what should have been a proper upgrade. And it's not often that you actually see a tactical urbanism approach left to be. And at the moment, I know that there's been some talk in Melbourne and in Sydney. They were talking about it the other day in a talk I was listening to around, you know, people saying, well, shouldn't we really just be investing in that? And the council who had made the investment was saying, well, yeah, sure, but that would take us, you know, another 4 or 5 years of planning and budget and change, whereas tactical urbanism allows us to make the change that has to happen right now so people can continue to use it. So yeah, it's I think that with the way that we're seeing that approach used is really changing practice, but there is that kind of catching up and constant need to communicate what and why to the community. Mm.
Yeah, and the points you mentioned, it was helpful for me to advocate for it as well. Because yes, we hear a lot over here that this is just temporary change. Do something permanent to fix it, and it's not going to. There is no permanent solution if people are not using it well. That experimentation was well because we have done it before as well. Our first project was at an institution, and it was quite a learning process. I learned that we made few decisions that didn't work here, so it was something a very it creates the experimentation brings a lot of lessons in its process. And yes, some of our efforts were appreciated. They were replaced with permanent installations by the institution itself. So this was something very heartwarming for me personally. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, Harriet, this I would like to ask you that what do you have anything to say about the impact of public spaces on mental health? Because being a mental health advocate, I'm really bringing this into people awareness. So do you have anything to say? Yeah.
Absolutely. So I suppose there's an abundance of research out there around the benefits that access to green spaces have, and spending time out in nature and in parks and those sorts of things. I guess just the benefits that has to someone's mental health. But I suppose where kind of placemaking feeds into it is looking at those spaces for interaction. And I think that's where public parks and things like that have an opportunity for people to come together and connect. And we saw that during the COVID-19 lockdown with the increase in the amount of use of our public spaces, and places like dog parks where you often hear about people meeting one another down in those spaces because they're bringing their dogs down there, and it's almost like their dogs are taking that kind of interaction. It's making it really easy, because if your dogs are talking to one another, then you're naturally going to chat to the owner and those sorts of things. And I think that it's about the physical green space as having benefits for mental health, but it's also connecting with people that also has such a great benefit. So if you're living in an apartment tower, we did a park project in Melbourne not too long ago, and it was a park space that was surrounded by 4 apartment buildings, and it was going to be a brand new space. There was a warehouse there previously, and we were able to involve all the people that were going to become future residents in those apartment towers in the actual design process. And one idea that they really wanted and was implemented, the park's now been built and it's been really successful, which is really great to see. But they created community planter boxes there, but they also created what they called the harvest table. And the purpose of the harvest table was that you could be anyone from those apartment blocks, and you could come down and sit down there, and then other residents from the apartment blocks can come down and see someone sitting there and then come and join them. And so you're connecting then, whether it's through gardening or sitting down and having a conversation. So I think that, like I said, it's about the actual access to green space, but it's also about connecting with people and green spaces being an opportunity and the benefits that brings for mental health.
Yeah, I agree too, because the core of mental health and the healing process is that the healing is in connection, not in isolation. Isolation causes more of a deficit in the mental health and more destruction to it. So and we see that when people are not connecting, the place is isolated. When people are connecting, the place is connected, vibrant and lovely. Yeah, it's such a good point that I would like to mention in my article next time. Okay, so thank you so much. Now moving on to the question that I ask everyone. So what drives you and what keeps you focused on public spaces and all the work that you do?
What drives us? I think quite clearly for me, it's the idea of bringing people on the journey and having people come into this story and really bring everything to life. You can create the most beautiful space, and if you don't actually use it and love it, particularly in an urban setting, I just feel like that's certainly what we're trying to recreate, is that sense of the feeling you get when you walk through a place and you can tell that it's, you know, loved, or that there's energy there, that you can see the culture of the community, the identity of the community. So trying to create and curate those situations.
Yeah, and I agree with Brooke as well. I think that a big thing that drives both of us and everyone at Fourfold is that personal connection. So whether it's a personal connection with your clients or with the communities, and seeing the benefit and hearing from the community about the process, and that placemaking, it does work, and you hear that kind of time and time again of people being like, you know, whether I was skeptical about something, or, you know, thank you so much for involving me in this, that kind of stuff. I think that creating that ownership is something that's really beautiful. And the other thing I think that drives the placemaking network is being united around like creating better places. And I think that that's why I think it's quite rare as an industry, and I'm not sure if you agree with this, Asba, but you don't necessarily see like industries collaborating the way placemakers do. I think that's something really unique about the placemaking network, and that's where having groups like Placemaking X and stuff like that is. It's all about coming together and learning from one another and just creating these better places. So I think that's something that unites us all.
Definitely.
Yeah, and it's a joyful experience as well as it's an empowering experience. For me personally, it was an empowering most of all. Okay, do you want to share any memory that makes you proud and keeps you and makes you proud and feel love and more passion about your work? Any proud moment of your work life? Any memory that you could recall?
Oh, I mean, lots.
Yeah.
Which one?
Literally. I'm like, oh.
Lots. I would say one of the things we're so lucky in this industry, because everything that we do is right now and it's real, and there's usually, you know, an activity or an event or a tactical approach or something that happens within, you know, a year of finishing or during the project. A lot of the work in the built environment industry is you do a lot of strategy work, but you don't necessarily see your outcomes built. And so it's much harder to get that sense of like satisfaction. So I love, there's so many moments that, you know, I've personally been involved, and it's always those people coming back and thanking you or telling you, you know, I love that, or it's really changed my life, or it's changed my career. You know, some of those moments are pretty special, which I think, or, you know, businesses that have been struggling and you've managed to turn it around, a whole community of business owners to come together to really take ownership of a place. So I think they're the things that kind of are quite special, and give you those moments, as you said.
And also when you go back to a place, I think that's a really exciting thing as well, is like, as a placemaker, you don't really want to take credit for any of that sort of stuff. It's more about building the capacity of the local people to do it. And then when you go back and you return to a place, we've worked on a project recently in Ipswich, and as part of that project, we created helped create a community group who has just gone gangbusters in terms of the amount of work that they've done. And just through the process, we were able to create the license for them to feel like they could do that. And they're out there and they're cleaning off graffiti and replanting all the planter boxes and all of that kind of local action, which I think is like, that's the stuff that really makes your heart go, oh my gosh, this is so great.
Yeah, it's interesting. And because in that one, a lot of the work that we actually did was behind the scenes, like systems change to enable, to create a really sort of simple, streamlined system for that group to come together around. And so, yeah, it's quite, there's so many people from like major stakeholders, councillors, the mayor, you know, everyone involved in that process to get it to work. That, yeah, I mean, that's the best thing about placemaking, isn't it? There isn't someone who takes all the credit. It's a collaboration. So, yeah, very nice.
Yeah, only listening to you talking about it, and it's like a cheerful memory. It made me happy. I love this part of the interview, because when people recall their the proudest moment or the happy moments, it makes me happy as well. Okay, so now would you like to share any struggling moment or any project that you recall had a setback? You set out to achieve something, but you couldn't. And what did you learn from it? So
yeah. It's funny, I was reflecting on this only recently. So my list is long, just as long. Successes and fails. No, look, you always learn things, don't you? And I think that the the nice thing, and it's part of our values, is one of the things that we try to bring to our projects is that safe to fail, environment. So you can test and trial ideas, and if it doesn't work, that's the whole point of testing and trialing, isn't it? So yes, there's definitely been cases where things haven't gone to plan, but probably the one that sticks in my mind the most was when I haven't followed my kind of gut in terms of, is this the right approach or not? And so, I know that the tactical urbanism approach, for example, only works as a process and as a tool to bring people together around a vision and to help create that shared vision and to create that sense of agency and enable and empower communities. And in a case where I can recall, I was persuaded by the client to take a really top-down approach to tactical urbanism, which doesn't work, as everyone in the placemaking industry would know. But we sort of, in that case, were kind of pigeonholed. And so, yeah, you look back at those situations, and I guess all it did was made me realise that no, never again. I won't allow that to happen ever again. But yeah, there's definitely been, process ones as well. We've, again, talking about that project I mentioned just before with Pomo, it's a streetscape one where we had the sound trail. There was artwork that was done, and then there was storytelling, and the idea was to get both of those components to come together. But because we sort of didn't stay involved, we didn't get that full cycle. So, little learnings all the time. And I think that is something that's continually helping us to innovate and improve and, do better.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think it's about going with your gut with it a lot of the time with placemaking and kind of trusting your learnings as well. So I think that one thing is that you kind of can't be too tough on yourself either, because a lot of the time with this sort of stuff, you are trialing something for the first time ever. And so sometimes it's also about the expectations you set on yourself of like, oh my gosh, this didn't work, or this happened, or this community member got really angry about this, that kind of stuff. But at least you know that next time you do it again, you'll know maybe not to do that, or to change that, or to, speak to that person before you speak to that person, or that kind of stuff. So I'm the same as Brooke. I've got a long list of things that haven't worked, but it's also meant that it's refined kind of every bit of work that you do.
I think too, just hearing you talk then though, what I would hate to see is we have a very risk adverse environment here in Australia, very risk adverse. And we tend to follow, if it works, we'll follow that pattern. And that's probably been one of our biggest barriers to really doing different and better as a nation in terms of built environment and in terms of the way that we activate and use public spaces. And so yes, there are things you learn. I think that anyone in placemaking, I would encourage, just because you have one bad experience with a test or a trial doesn't mean don't try it again. From it, but it doesn't. I think if we create ourselves a rule book of things not to do, that we were limiting our ability to be creative and
everything.
And what I try to prepare my mind for is that there is no failure in this process. There is only a learning process. There is going to be something to learn about. So this keeps my expectations a bit low, and it saves me from a huge hurt or disappointment in the process. But yes, there's so much to learn, and this is something that I set up for in the journey. Okay, any favorite placemaking mantra of yours?
The one I probably say the most. I quite often say the journey is more important than the output, and by that I mean it's the process. It's the way that we do something, not what we produce at the end, that's most important.
Yeah, and I'd say as well, I agree with Brooks. And I'd also say it's about putting people first, I think, is another mantra, because no matter what you're doing, it's always thinking about those local people and what this means for them and involving them and that kind of thing as well. And like Brooke said before, it's with placemaking, just because something worked well somewhere doesn't mean it's going to work well in another place. We have to be making sure that it's responding to those local people. So putting people first.
Thank you so much for sharing that very personal thing with us. Because this is something that gives us the insight in your personality as well. That's very heartwarming. Thank you so much. Okay, would you like to share your opinion on Pakistan or placemaking in Pakistan? Anything you would like to say?
No, you're fabulous. Thank you for connecting with us and connecting everybody globally. I love what you're doing. We really do appreciate your time. So thank you.
Definitely. And I'd say as well, nothing but praise, because I think that, again, when we first connected, I think the first thing we connected about was the video that you shared with me about Porch Placemaking Week. And I think that you're absolutely onto something with your videos as to whether they're documenting a project or documenting conversations like this. I mean, you're doing so much for the global placemaking movement. So
absolutely,
only praise.
Thank you so much. Okay, this is overwhelming now. I do expect that people share something that they hear on the media or something like that, which is not so positive. But thank you so much for your appreciation. It means a lot to me. And this is something that keeps me going. This is empowering as well for receiving appreciation, and the people are getting to know more about us in a positive light. That's something I'm on to, and this is something that makes me happy. Okay, lastly, would you like to share any advice for the people who find the future career in placemaking?
Yes, this is another one that I have had the chance to think about previously, so I'm a bit sneaky here. But I think something that's really interesting to me is that placemaking is an industry that isn't an industry. You know, there's not a professional career pathway to get to placemaking, which is really unique and really exciting. And the reason it's like that is because it only works if we work across many different areas and silos with lots of different perspectives. And so my advice to someone coming into this as a pathway would be to come into this with whatever your knowledge is. It could be your personal experiences or your career, but whatever that is, it's not about having to start from scratch and learn a new industry. It's actually just about, you know, taking that lens and then thinking about what placemaking it is and how you can add value to that process.
Definitely. And I'd also add to that, because I agree, is like be authentic as well. I think, again, that's something when you're connecting with people and you're connecting with a network, and whether you're doing community engagement or running a project or something like that, it's about being your authentic self and bringing kind of your, I guess, personality and that sort of thing to the position as well. So,
yeah, definitely, because this is how we are all adding to the network. It's about creating the network, and it's about creating the movement, not taking something and just copy pasting it. This is something I love about placemaking, because there is no copy paste. Being an architect, I just hate the culture of copy paste. But I like to innovate things and to create more things. Thank you so much, Harriet and Brooke, for this conversation, for taking out time, for your energy, for sharing your insights and everything. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks
Very good
for having
care of
us.
yourself. Pleasure. Pleasure.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.